You go there.
You have to get past a goblin checkpoint to advance. One of the things needed is an authorization located in the goblin leader's room. He is sleeping, so both combat and stealth are viable options for getting the papers. Once obtained, you notice they are not signed, but previously you most likely found a goblin prisoner. If he was freed, then you can find him drinking a short while later and he will gratefully falsify the papers. If you did not free him, the goblin will still be in the cell and you can ask him to falsify the authorization there. He will agree and say that you should give him the documents. If you do, the papers will be falsified, but he will refuse to hand them back until you open the cell. At this point, you can let him out to obtain the forged papers, or kill the goblin, then open the cell and loot said forged papers off his body, thus bringing you closer to the original goal. Or you can bypass that entire sequence by attacking the guards of the goblin checkpoint, which results in them opening the gate and presenting the path to freedom, provided you can prevail in combat. I price such reactivity far above dialogue trees or wheels or binary moral choices. If you agree, then allow me to present one of my favorite games of all time, Arx Fatalis. Quick question, what is the most important game of all time? Whatever you chose, you are wrong, because the answer is Ultima Underworld. And if you did answer Ultima Underworld, good man. Now obviously there is a large degree of subjectivity in regards to such a question, but one cannot understate the pioneer this game was. From being the original 3D first-person RPG to one of the first releases to dynamically change audio based on the player's actions, so much of this game's technical DNA can be found in today's industry. Ultima Underworld belongs to and spawned the Immersive Sim, which is kind of hard to define. It is often called a genre, but a more fitting description would be a school of thought or style of design. Whether it is an adventurer trapped in a dungeon, a medieval thief on the loose, or a globe-trotting cyber spy, the Immersive Sim tries to create systems that naturally simulate such situations. The developer is not telling you how to be something, they are giving you the tools to discover that something for yourself. These types of games had their glory moments and spawned all-time classics, Arkane Studios being the most representative developer in this area, but they disappeared for two large reasons: small audience and lack of graphical fidelity. These games were never chart toppers, and while the art direction plus level design was spectacular, they were not pretty games. Even Ultima Underworld back in 1991 got panned for not being pretty enough. But during this style's end times, Arx Fatalis appeared as the last representative of that old guard, made by developers which were huge admirers of Looking Glass and Ultima Underworld. It is also the most underrated immersive sim, getting a passing mention here and there, but shamefully forgotten overall. The first thing one should notice regarding this game is how it tries to be Ultima Underworld with just the name changed. Rafael Colantonio, the man behind Arx Fatalis, pitched this game as Ultima Underworld 3 while working at EA. They said no, so Mr. Colantonio left to form Arkane Studios and turned his pitch into reality. The game takes place in a fantasy setting where the sun has disappeared and an ice age began, thus the various races huddled together in underground cities. One such place being the titular Arx, where the story takes place. The whole setup is an Ultima Underworld tribute, and setting the entire game in an 8-level mega dungeon is more manageable production-wise, but even so. Arx Fatalis is a fantastic game development triumph. They started with 4 people and ended up with 9, while the whole budget was $1.2 million. That is peanuts even when adjusted for inflation. Not to mention their original publisher Fish Tank went under 1 year into development, and their new publisher Joe Wood released their game 6 months early. This obviously led to a very buggy launch, which Arkane tried to rectify with patches, but the game's reputation was already set in stone and contributed to it passing under the radar for many. Thankfully, the people of the future will have a much easier time experiencing this game due to the Arx Libertatis mod, an indispensable fan patch that stabilizes the game. It is the definitive way to play Arx Fatalis in my opinion. Even with all the bugs and technical issues though, the sheer ambition on display given the team size is staggering. The game features location damage on modules, a physics system that allows you to toss everything you interact with, and a dynamic stealth system based on shadows. Even more impressive, there is a very complex AI scripting system here, which was combined with a design direction that sought to give enemies personality. Cowardly goblins would run away when at low health to find reinforcements, ratmen use hit and run attacks while also pickpocketing during fights, and mummies are slow but have a paralyzing touch which makes close range deadly. Those things alone put Arx Fatalis above many other games, and they are not even the highlights. You take flour, combine it with water, and then put it near a fire which will cause it to rise, thus making bread. Words cannot describe the childlike sense of wonder this inspired when I played this game, and over time I learned I was not the only one to have this feeling. The environmental interactions and how they are achieved through the interface is outstanding. The vast majority of current RPGs, and games in general, are completely against engagement through execution. Even suggesting to a developer the incorporation of diegetic elements in the UI is like pulling teeth. Menus upon menus and drop-down lists upon drop-down lists, pure abstraction is king today. Not in Arx Fatalis though, it uses the adventure game hybrid interface that was started by Ultima Underworld, continued by System Shock 2 and then improved by this game. Moving about and fighting is done in traditional first-person action game fashion, but opening up one's inventory activates a cursor which allows players to pick up items, interact with the environment, or combine different elements. The guiding design philosophy is that if you saw something, you could do something with it, and this interface was perfect for that. Find a gem in the wall, combine it with a pickaxe to get it out. Want to get wine out of a barrel? Just combine it with an empty bottle. There are dozens upon dozens of little flavorful environmental interactions that give Arx Fatalis its vivaciousness, such as dropping cheese on the floor near mice which will cause them to eat it. Arkane was hyper-focused on having the game world itself be an engaging element from a systemic perspective rather than a simple three-dimensional space for the players to navigate. The action never stops outside of cutscenes and dialogue. Using either the inventory or the book-styled character menu does not pause the game. The sheer dedication to this style and flow of interaction led to some unique idiosyncrasies such as trading, which is done by placing or taking items out of chests that every merchant has. You can ignore character interaction through the entire trading process. Now the element which brings all this together, from the environmental interaction to the carefully presented level design, is the magic system. That which Arx Fatalis is most remembered for today. Throughout the game, the player will find runes with patterns which represent a concept, such as negate or projectile. Entering the casting mode allows the player to draw said pattern in a fashion similar to Peter Molyneux's Black and White. Combine the right runes and a spell is cast. Yok means create fire, which will light up every light source in a radius around the player. Adding projectile at the end results in Yok Tar, which is a fireball. The player can store up to 3 such spells, the rest must be manually cast in the heat of battle. This is what I mean by engagement through execution. You can even see other mages drawing the runes in real time. This dedication to a coherent and universal casting system, shared by both the player character and non-player characters, adds tremendously to the world building and personality of the game. In other words, magic feels magical. You can even turn the game into Doom with it. A large part of the magic system's charm also comes from the majority of spells having non-direct damage effects. Create a force field, levitate, slow time, night vision, disable trap, and even the ability to summon a magical eyeball that scouts for you are just some of these effects. Unfortunately, this means that the few damaging spells that are there needed to be effective. Very effective. So effective in fact that the game can be finished with just the fireball spell. Balance leaves a lot to be desired. There are 4 attributes plus 9 skills, and every level gives the opportunity to increase any of them. The progress is quite open-ended, or it would be if some skills weren't borderline useless. There is a single bow in the entire game, and no enemy uses this type of attack. To say archery was an afterthought is being generous. Meanwhile, object knowledge is indispensable if you want to repair, identify, poison weapons, or make potions. Other things seem to make little sense, like intuition that affects store prices, which is fine, but it also reveals secrets. Why? A big part of this game's appeal is figuring things out for yourself. Having a skip secret skill seems counterintuitive at best. Melee combat is also overall simplistic and begs for a defensive option such as a parry, block, or a dash move. As it stands, all you do is move in and out of your opponent's range, trying to bait them into a miss, then hit them with a fully charged swing. Suffice to say, Arx Fatalis does not shine if you choose to eschew magic completely. One can only look at the damage those 6 months taken by Joe Wood caused with frustration. If Arkane had the original planned schedule, this would have been a masterpiece. It is that close. Of course, it is still worth the time, and a large part of what makes it so interesting is the pacing. The game is split up into 3 parts and they feel quite different. First off, there is the fish out of water start. You are an amnesiac captured by goblins who escapes and then makes his way to the human kingdom. Once there, you earn your place, get your own room, and generally learn the ropes while doing most of the game's talking. I think this might be the best part due to Arx Fatalis being an exploration-driven experience. When you are new and haven't bumped into the game's broken edges, there are exciting things to discover right from the get-go. Now in regards to narrative, Arx Fatalis is nothing special. You have races such as goblins, trolls, or dwarves, and the plot revolves around defeating an evil god. The voice acting isn't helped at all by the fact that this was a translated French script, and the budget wasn't the greatest.
I never snored in my life.
Yes, you do.
That's enough. Let's go. Actually, I think you're the one who snores. That's why you're accusing me.
I can't believe it! I can't believe it!
Likewise, the journal is a mess where all entries are in sequential order without any sorting option. That being said, Arx Fatalis' writing does a damn fine job of creating a believable ecology. The races are divided by levels and there is a lot of politics at play, such as the humble trolls mining for gemstones while the conniving goblins sell them. Maybe there is something you can do about that, I don't know. After a while in this fortress trapped by a desolate icy landscape, you get a wonderful sense of place regarding how the inhabitants of Arx live and interact with each other. That is just all-round good world building. Another good part is that nobody is indispensable in the story. That might not sound like much, and it shouldn't, were it not for the fact that almost every modern RPG grants plot-important characters invulnerability, or just doesn't allow the player to attack them. But Arx Fatalis comes from a different age, an age where player agency was at the forefront, not the writer's story. It is entirely possible and even feasible, no exploits required, to finish a kill-crazy playthrough where you attack everything in sight. Now that's freedom. Moving on, we have the second part of the game, the action-adventure. Arx Fatalis follows a more realistic non-linear power curve, with the early game showing rapid progress, as the player goes from a bone weapon to a longsword and levels are easily gained. This is also reflected in the static strength of the enemies. If you kill one troll, for example, you can most likely kill all of them. Thus, by this point in the game, your character most likely has the best equipment money can buy, so resources aren't a big concern. It is all about dungeon crawling. The high points here are an interesting puzzle-focused temple and an absolutely amazing crypt. This is one of my favorite dungeons in gaming. It is oozing with atmosphere and it is filled with a lot of little clever tricks. One of the later bits is a tad confusing due to it actually being 2 puzzles needlessly layered on top of each other, but that is just a blemish on an otherwise excellent segment. The sound does so much here. The game has mainly ambient tracks, but Kemal Amarasingham of Thief fame played a part in their creation. The sound design just might be the thing that most likely stays relevant in a modern context. Just listen to the effects of the Repel Undead spell, top-notch work. At any rate, towards the end of this dungeon delving part, the player will encounter Arx's most famous imbalance, the Yilsids. These dark warriors absolutely destroy in close range due to using the speed spell. This is not a difficulty spike, this is a difficulty Everest, and I am torn on it. On the one hand, it is completely unfair towards melee-oriented characters, but on the other hand, it forces players to come up with solutions and that makes them so very memorable. They can still be beat with pure sword skill, as you can see in the background video where I engage an Yilsid at a lower level than I should, and win by running away until his speed effect ends, so while it may be difficult, it is not an unsurmountable peak. Finally, we have the third part, which is by far the most lopsided in terms of gameplay. At this point, the protagonist is virtually unkillable and all major combat challenges have passed. Surprisingly, the devs took this into account, and the last adventures are focused on navigation and survival horror of all things. That is very rare in an RPG, for the player to be at the peak of the progress system and then to have a segment that emphasizes their powerlessness. Unfortunately, this is counterbalanced by the Ratman levels, which are entirely focused on combat at a point when you are invincible. Welcome to the most boring moment in Arx Fatalis. It is not particularly long, but this is the only part of this game which could be characterized as filler. Its removal won't have affected pretty much anything. Still, the survival horror segment more than makes up for it, and when reaching the end, most players will reflect happily upon their journey through the underground city of Arx. The entire game is a labor of love, and I can only imagine the happiness Arkane experienced when working with ex-Looking Glass developers they so idolize. They even managed to get the voice actor of Thief's protagonist, Step Russell, to do several voices, including the intro. Even with the cut corners, Arkane did a more than fine job at paying homage to their influence. That being said, I personally look back with disappointment knowing Arx Fatalis never got a sequel. One of the factions can actually travel through the wasteland with special gear and chemicals. They are portrayed as cyberpunk Eskimos in one cutscene, and not seeing more of them was a damn shame. Arkane would go on and eventually reach mainstream success, deservedly so. They have never put out a bad game, and the level design is consistently some of the best in the business, but I always come back to Arx Fatalis being my personal favorite. Obviously they have come a long way in terms of polish and presentation, but none of their titles going forward had the same unrestrained focus on game design, and trying to cram ideas at the cost of presentation rather than the other way around. Sadly, in June 2017, Rafael Colantonio departed from Arkane Studios to focus on his family after 18 years that felt like never having a vacation. I don't know how good or bad Arkane shall be after his departure, or even if he will ever enter the games industry again. But to me, Rafael Colantonio shall always be the man who made one of my childhood favorite games. He made a fitting tribute towards those he idolized and even managed to be on the same level to earn their respect. That is something that many developers strive for, but few achieve.
So I was, and I still am, a big fan of Richard Garriott, creator of Ultima. And one day, after very early when Arx got released, I got an email from Richard that I barely knew back then. He was playing my game and he was complaining that he did not have enough arrows. Very gratifying for me because I'm such a fan of his games, and it was it was just like the best thing that could happen to me to have Richard Garriott emailing me about my game, and so showing me that he was actually enjoying and playing my game. We're friends. I live in Austin and I see him occasionally.